Wonderful to be with you all tonight. And I just really enjoy this opportunity to just be together in the way that we can these days and explore what we can over the next little bit tonight. So I thought we could just settle in a bit since we've found our way to this sense of awareness often over the last few months. Maybe we can just start from there, just to sense into that awareness that is present already. There's that sense of aliveness, that sense of, I know that I'm here. I may not know exactly what that is, but I know that there's something present now. There's something alive here. And we can just sense into that without trying to define what it is or understand it or conceptualize it or stand back and look at it. You know, just to sense into that mystery, really, just of what is already present without us having to conjure it up out of nothingness or imagination or conceptual thinking. So as we just sense into that very simple awareness, aware of whatever it is that may be tugging at our attention. You know, maybe it's some residual thoughts from the day. Maybe it's a feeling in the body. Maybe it's a bit of restlessness or anxiety, whatever the feeling or the thought or the memory might be that's bubbling up at the moment. We can just see that as the next arising within this awareness. See it, notice it, and then just come back to the simple awareness of it. So the awareness isn't a static thing, right? It's ever present, but it's also alive, also willing to be present for whatever it is that's arising in your environment, within your sense perceptions, whatever that may be. And it does so without preferences. We can notice that as well. You know, we hear in spirituality that it's good to be without preferences. In Zen, they talk about, you know, the great way is easy for those who have no preferences. But we can just notice that this awareness already is present without preferences. You know, our mind certainly may have preferences, liking this situation over that. But either way, that awareness will be present for it. You know, without us having to try to achieve a state of no preference. We can see that that deepest part of ourselves, this awareness of the arisings within this world, within this body, within this mind, that awareness already is without preference. We might also notice that awareness is already at peace. You know, it doesn't feel, when we sense into it, it doesn't feel like there is something lacking there. If you sense that when you're resting in that awareness, you know that. If that recognition hasn't yet arisen within you, that's fine. We can just take that as a maybe. Maybe that's true. And just hold it lightly rather than trying to force something based on a concept that we've heard somebody say. Right? So this is all about just our own direct experience of that simple sense of being here in this moment, present. So that sense of awareness in the body feels like presence. You know, so when we can sense into the body as being alive, being here, being able to sense that within this body. It's a felt sense of presence. If we find our mind tugging us away from that, resting in that awareness, you know, there's several techniques that we can use to pull us back again. One is, you know, just focusing on the pure sensations of the body. You know, maybe a sound that we hear in the room or outside the window. Maybe focusing on the breath, which is, you know, until we make it a concept, it happens non-conceptually. It happens out of the innate knowingness of our bodies. So we can just allow it to do that. We don't have to try to make it in any particular way. We can just take a step back and notice that the breath is already happening in a very non-conceptual way. And we can notice just that simple movement of the body, of the air, sense of being nourished. So that can pull us back to a sense of being present for this moment. Can tend to pull us back out of the mind's insistence on thinking about something much more interesting than this awareness, right? That's what the mind tells us. So we can just see that tendency. It's not bad, it's what it was trained to do. Actually has a usefulness to pull our attention into something that demands our attention. It's just that we overuse it for everything. Not just when it's needed, but just out of habitual momentum, wanting something to be different, better, more. And somehow we believe the mind will help us find what that is. All the while, this awareness is aware of that whole tendency, that whole show. It's okay with it. It's actually just there, noticing it. If we wanted to personalize it a little bit, you could say that it had, you know, some curiosity about it, maybe even a sense of humor about it. So this is something that we can come back to during the day, is just to sense back into this awareness that's present. You know, it's not something that we've had to fabricate. We didn't attain it. It was present already. We just slowed down just enough to notice it. Notice that it was already present, already here, already willing to experience whatever it is that may arise within it. Okay, good. Everybody here? I thought what we could talk about tonight is devotion. This is a theme that someone suggested, and I thought it was a worthy theme to explore. For one reason, when the term devotion is used, it has some weight behind it, right? It's often interpreted in religious terms, right? We can talk about, singing devotional hymns or practicing a devotional type of yoga. Bhakti yoga is like one of devotion, outpouring oneself into maybe a guru. This is popular in India. Devotional prayers to one's image of the divine, of God, and the purpose of it has some validity, right? It's to take our attention away from the personalized self and sort of expand it, devote it to something larger than just our own individual life, our own wants and fears, to open our heart up really to something larger than ourselves. So from that perspective, we can understand that it's a valid path, right? Like all teachings, they have a usefulness maybe at some point in the journey and less usefulness at some other point. So one of the, just talk really briefly about the potential positive effects of this type of opening oneself in a devotional kind of way to something that appears to be, that we consider to be outside of ourselves. Whether it's the, let's say the Indian guru, I devote myself to you, and somehow there'll be, a spiritual payoff down the road, that through that devotion, that somehow I will be lifted up into a different order of, spiritual understanding, let's say. Okay, good. But the potential downside, if that practice is undertaken, let's say, too early in the journey, before we've really examined what it is that is doing the devoting. In other words, if we sort of bypass what, an understanding of how our, let's say, mind works, how, emotions and thoughts interplay, how we view our life, how we view our beliefs and opinions about life, until that's really explored, it can, jumping too quickly into a devotional practice can bypass that really essential looking at oneself. So the idea that we can give up something, namely our personal self-interest, before we really examine them to know what they are, is improbable. Okay, when we don't get past something just by bypassing it, pretending it's of no importance. we can do that and be pulled into a practice that um, has been and is easily um, manipulated. In other words, our love and devotion and hope and expectations and um, life energy can be poured into, let's say, an external teacher. Um, and if if that teacher is authentic and integrous, beautiful. If not, there can really be a loss of one's sort of an innate intelligence. We sort of abdicate our own responsibility and give that over to somebody else, hoping that they will do the heavy lifting for us. So it's this practice of devotion, while it has value and can be totally valid practice, is also subject to manipulation. So there's some, fully awakened beings that still express this devotion as something that sounds like it's outside of themselves. Take Ramana, for example. I mean, his whole life after his awakening was spent, at the foot of this mountain, Arunachala, and he talked about it in a very devotional kind of way. But there's also no question that he recognized that the mountain was not other than himself. But he still talked about it as if it were, right? Rumi also, in his poems, often talks about the beloved, right? The beloved as if it were somehow other than who he truly was himself. Devotional outpouring of love to the beloved, right? And yet you can see also that there's no separation there. It's almost a play of images, knowing full well that it is all one. So this devotional practice, this outpouring, has merit under certain circumstances. It can be a beautiful practice. It can open up the heart. But I'd suggest that if we start out on that path too soon, we may bypass some things that really need to be seen about ourselves that don't cause us to be pulled back into that gravitational sphere of, ordinary human desires and fears, etc. So I've talked so far about the outward going devotional path. So I want to just stop there in that vein and talk about devotion from an entirely different perspective. And that is that when we really stop and are honest with ourselves about what we want, is that what we want and what we do to gain that is all founded on a sense of, I wish myself well. I wish myself a sense of well-being. And I suggest that's true for all of us. How we go about doing that may vary all over the map, right? We can see that. So the how we interpret that underlying sense of wishing myself well, how that's interpreted, how we seek to gain that sense of peace and happiness and safety is expressed in, almost an infinite number of ways. Some of benefit to the world, some not so, right? We can see that. So how it's expressed can vary tremendously, but I suggest that the underlying sense of I wish myself well, sense of well-being, is at the core of how we lead our life. Right? So when we get into religion or spirituality, that's sense of, I want what's best for me is not encouraged. Right? It's better to be selfless, right? But at the heart of it, there's still this sense of, okay, it's good to be selfless, but what will that do for me? So there can be, this reluctance even to admit to ourselves that I wish myself well. So what I'd suggest is just radically different, is just to accept that as being maybe where we start from, especially if it's true for us, especially if we can see that, yes, underneath what I do, even if I'm doing something altruistically, maybe I can see, yes, and I feel better about myself when I act that way. Okay. It's fine. We can just see that desire to feel okay. And then we can really feel into that, what that is. So this question of how do we go about satisfying that desire for a sense of well-being comes down to choices that we make in our life. We could say, to what are we devoted to? And there's an easy way to answer that question. We can just look at how we spend our time, right? If we say we're, devoted to waking up and spirituality and enlightenment, but we spend our time, listening to political news excessively, worrying about the future, trying to reimagine the past, trying to avoid any situation that could possibly be anxiety producing. If we spend, a great deal of our time sort of wallowing in grief or regret or shame or fear or, wishing things had been different. We try to reimagine the past or, continuously hoping for a certain outcome in the future. However we spend our time is what we are devoted to. So we can just stand back and look at it, look at how do I spend my days and see really clearly what we're devoted to. But we need to do it objectively, without judgment. Just say, okay, this is how I'm spending my time. I might say that I'm devoted to, awakening, spirituality, the divine. But how I'm actually spending my time is not that. So one way to look at this is imagine that, let's say, some decades from now, some years from now, we find ourselves in the last few months of our life. We know that the end of our life is coming closer. From that perspective, looking back on our life, what kinds of things would we wish that we spent more time doing? What kinds of things would we wish from that viewpoint that we spent less time doing? You know, there are not many people on, on their in their hospice care that, tell the caregivers that what they wish they had done is to spend more time watching television, or more time at work, or more time gossiping. But it actually doesn't matter what anybody else says. This is something, a question that only you can answer for yourself. So it's important to really give yourself the opportunity to ask that, almost from this future perspective, looking back on our life. What kinds of things would I like to have spent more time doing, and what kinds of things would I like to have spent less time doing? And it's really, I would suggest this as a exercise even, over the next few days, is just to sit down and from that perspective, write down the answers to those two questions, just in real simple statements, not judgmental, or not, what I should have done, or none of that. Just what I'd like to do more of and what I'd like to do less of. And that gives us some indication of where we truly want to go, rather than just sort of going along on the momentum of the day after day busyness. And if we really see that clearly, and write it down. It may be helpful even to read it out loud. And the value of that is when we read something out loud, especially that are our own words, we can sense right away whether we're telling ourselves the truth or not, right? So this little exercise can be an indication of where we truly want to go, and that has changed and may continue to change over the course of a lifetime. I mean, there was a time when we were, I don't know, teenagers, early 20s, when the most important thing was to party like it was no tomorrow, right? Maybe with a little more maturity, it was the most important thing was our career, our families. They may still be the most important thing. So there's no wrong answer here. You get to choose. Whatever feels like the most important thing to you, go with that. Right? But it's good to do that, make that choice consciously, rather than just as a result of the momentum up to this point. It's also good when, we're considering, life going forward from this moment, that we don't look back with regret in how we have spent our time in the past. It's easy to say, well, I wasted my time doing this or that. But that's not really true. We can't really say that anything was a waste of time, because at every moment in the past, we did it with the desire for our own well-being. Same. Our execution might not have been that skillful, but the desire wasn't wrong, right? That desire, as it was expressed then in the past, maybe for a long time in the past, has led to an understanding that has brought you to this moment when we get to choose again. Maybe with a little more maturity, maybe with a little more awareness. Beautiful. So whatever's gone before isn't to be regretted. it's to be understood and learned from. And we can see whether, that is sufficiently compelling now to continue, or, do I want to shift directions a little bit? So it's important when we really look at this that we're doing it from our own deepest desire, because there can easily be a tendency that comes in that, when we feel like we're doing it, I don't know, let's say to prove our worthiness, or to, satisfy dad's desire, or to, feel worthy to my partner, to try to make that person happy. Whatever these desires are, have a certain place perhaps, but what is really important in the long run is, what do you really want from this lifetime? Because it's good to acknowledge that we have a certain amount of time in this lifetime. We have a certain amount of life energy too. This becomes more obvious as you get older. So the question is, how do we use this time and this life energy? So when we talk about allowing ourselves to sense into what do I really want to support this inner sense of well-being, it can sound like a selfish process, right? It can sound like it's all about me, but it has two advantages. One, it's true, because for most of us, for most of our life, hopefully not all of our life, but for most of our life, this is the center of the universe, right? Copernicus might have talked about the sun being the center of the solar system, but from a psychological perspective, it's no, me. I'm the center of everything that happens around me, right? So we're just allowing ourselves to explore what we truly feel without making it wrong. Okay. By doing that, it sort of, we're not competing against ourselves. Well, I feel like this, but I know I should feel like that. I feel like, just going out and having a good time, but another part of me wants to be spiritual, and I've heard that's a good thing. And so there's these competing energies. So what I'm talking about here in terms of devotion is being devoted to what is actually most true. And what I'm suggesting that is, for most of us, for maybe most of our lives, hopefully not all of it, but most of our life, this sense of, I wish myself well. That's my truest feeling. So now we're doing something beyond the ideas of right and wrong, good and bad. We're just coming into allowing ourselves to look objectively at what we really want and whether our actions support that or not. So this is actually a useful point, because it allows us to look at ourselves without judgment, to look at ourselves without feeling like we have to hide all that shadowy stuff. And it gives us, allows us that devotion to ourselves to really look at whatever's there, be willing to look at whatever's there, with a sense of, I'm doing this um, with my highest and best interest in view. Right? So it still sounds really personal, like I'm doing this for me, but the willingness to look at our behavior as it relates to what we truly want gives us a direction to bring those two things more and more into alignment. And we do that not by, trying to, break our bad habits, etc. It's our willingness to really look at the motivations behind what we do. This, all the pleasure seeking, all the, fear avoidance, all the activities that we do to, sort of numb ourselves or distract ourselves or occupy ourselves with, mental conceptions about the world and spirituality and, heavenly orders of things. So by being willing to really allow ourselves to look from a very, very personal, subjective place in ourselves, without the input of what I should be doing, what other people expect me to do, what I think is the right thing to do, all of those filters removed, and look at what it is that I really value, what I really want. And I suggest by doing that, it opens up avenues where we are willing to really look at what it is that is experiencing this life. So we've all had, countless experiences up to this point. I mean, almost regardless of what our age is, even if we're relatively young in our 20s, 30s, we've still had countless experiences up until that point. And, so what we're talking about is not pursuing more experiences to find out about ourselves, but to really look at the nature of how this entity, whatever that is, experiences life, experiences the next happening. So we can see that there is the circumstances of the experience, and then there's this person's participation in that situation. And then into the mix, there's also the mental anticipation of, let's say, pleasure, the hopes for a certain outcome, maybe a little bit of fear mixed in that it may not turn out this way. And that becomes the whole experience. I mean, maybe we can remember back when we were hoping for, our high school first date with somebody, and there is the other person, right? And then there's this person, and then there's this psychological hope and expectation and fear and dread and, butterflies in the stomach, all of this mixed into that experience, however that turns out to be. But the experience itself is that whole composite of impermanent arisings. That person is not actually, we don't see it as that entire being. We see it as our perception of that person. We don't see ourselves as, the entirety of what we are. We see it as what we imagine that we are, how we choose to present who we are. So all of these artificialities go into creating this experience, right? Me, other, mental perceptions. And we believe that somehow the next experience will be the one that actually fulfills us, the one that will sort of resolve life's uncertainties, make everything make sense, allow us to feel that, if the next day we were to die, at least everything was resolved. Everything was complete. There's actually nothing more to do because of this experience. Have you ever had an experience like that? Or has it always been, that experience was really, really nice, but maybe it could be even better or more often, you know. So this this idea of seeking pleasure just begets more seeking pleasure. Seeking pleasure begets the pain of loss or the anxiety about loss. So after a while, we can begin to see that this whole movement outside of ourselves is fraught with this sense of impermanence, of not being ultimately satisfying. It might be really, really nice, but not ultimately satisfying. And if we catch on to that over time, the allure of experiences to pull us back into pursuit of this or that experience just begins to lose its ability to attract us. So it may be at that point that we come back to for the first time, a willingness to actually look for some lasting peace and happiness here. Here, where it's not subject to the comings and goings, not subject to whether the other person reciprocates or not, whether the boss likes me or not, it's just present here. So that willingness to look within, you could say, is the beginning of the end of this sense of personal self. But it's really by fully exploring this sense of personal self and what it is that truly makes that sense of happiness and peace and safety arise here, to see that it's not subject to the outside occurrences, allows us to come back home and be willing to look, maybe for the first time, at where we've never looked before, namely within ourselves. And by within ourselves, I mean prior to thought, even, prior to feeling, even. Just this coming back home to the sense of just sense of awareness. So this devotion to really allowing ourselves to feel into and express this most basic desire of wishing myself well, if we follow that thread deeply enough, will bring us back to a point that is ultimately not personal. Brings us back to this point of awareness that is aware of whatever situation may arise. Once we've seen that awareness for ourselves, we can just look at other people that we meet and just inquire just within our own head whether that awareness is animating the other person as well, whether that awareness that I'm experiencing here is really any different than what's animating the person over there, regardless of their behavior, regardless of whether we like them or not, right? Regardless of whether they hold the same political views or not. But we can see that there too, that same sense of I wish myself well is operational. It may be distorted by conditioning and, pleasure seeking and whatever, ideas and concepts. And okay, but we can see that we too, at another point in our life, that sense of deep well-being, aliveness flowing through this body-mind was also distorted here by my own beliefs and ideas and conceptions. If we can allow ourselves to see that as an almost necessary diversion into being caught into the trance of this lifetime, then we can grant that same understanding to the other person. Not that they may not understand it at all, but we can see it. That's what's important. We can not only see it, we can relate to the other person from knowing that. So whatever that relationship looks like will be different than any kind of a judgmental orientation towards the other person. So where does this devotion come into this picture? And I'd suggest that it comes from being willing to see, to look for, to really delve into what we truly want from this lifetime within the relatively short time that we have here in this lifetime, to fully utilize that for whatever it is that we value most dearly, to really ask ourselves, what's the most important thing for me? Not what you should devote yourself to, but what you really want to. If we're doing it out of a sense of should, there's no real power there. Nobody likes to do things out of a sense of, well, I should do that. Oh, I should meditate more. I shouldn't watch so much TV. But if we come across this potential, when we sort of dive deeply enough within our own desires, within our own deepest wants for ourselves in this lifetime, we can come across that possibility of ultimate freedom, ultimate contentment, sense of fearlessness, even if we suspect that that is a possibility. That possibility, if we're really sincere about it, draws us in. You'd say it sort of has the potential to light a fire in our heart. Where we're no longer practicing spirituality as a recreational pursuit, a competitive exercise. It suddenly becomes something different. It suddenly becomes something about, I just have to know. It doesn't, even the wanting to attain something doesn't have the same power as I've just got to know. I just got to know what this life is about. Who am I? What is this that's living this life? That urgency is what pulls us deeper. That urgency is, when it's expressed, that's what devotion looks like. Devoted to that search. And Nisargadatta talked about earnestness being like a homing instinct. He compared it to salmon swimming upstream to the little creek of their origin, returning home. That homing instinct pulling them back home. that level of urgency, that level of devotion. To use another metaphor, it's like, there's the gravitational pull of, all of our ideas and beliefs and opinions and conditioning and history, and everything has a sort of a gravitational pull, right? It's holding us into the trance of who we believe we are as a separate being. And you could almost say this devotion is sort of the energetic propulsion, the movement, just this outpouring from our deepest nature, from our spiritual heart to propel ourselves beyond this gravitational pull. That takes energy. It's not hobby time. It actually requires our sincere devotion. But that devotion arises out of sensing that there's something there deserving of that devotion. So the devotion isn't something like, well, I'm really being devoted because I know it's good for me. It's way beyond that. It's the sense of, I just have to know. I just have to go there. So we're no longer, spend time trying to carve out 20 minutes to meditate, or, thinking that, trying to work, some quiet time into our busy schedule. It becomes much more than that. It becomes, it actually permeates our entire day. When we're walking, we may come back to this sense of awareness. Maybe if we're agitated, we come back to our breath. Maybe, we have a few minutes before a phone call and we can relax into just this present awareness. We can hold a question of inquiry and just hold it and let it remain present in our life as a real thing, not because we should, not because we've heard it's the right question to ask, but because it is the question that feels most important. And we're willing to ask it. We're willing to uncover all those rocks, to look at whatever shadowy places may feel like they need to be looked at. We're willing to encounter things that may be, just a little bit beyond our comfort zone, a little outside of our envelope of familiarity. We're willing to go through fear rather than try to run around it somehow. So this becomes our day. I mean, we may still go to work, we may still have other responsibilities, but in the background and often within the foreground, there's this deep yearning, this exploration, and that is devotion when it's fully alive and fully functioning. It's not something that we do because we should do. We're not doing it because it's the right thing to do. We're doing it because it's the only thing to do. It has risen to that level of importance in our life. And that energy will propel us beyond this gravitational pull of what we thought we were. So this whole direction that I'm suggesting is using our personal sense of wishing ourselves well, and just following that thread all the way down. It sounds selfish, and it ends up being anything but that. Ends up being a recognition that what we are is not other than, well, everything else.